Hello and welcome back to another episode of Armchair Analysts, the only podcast that worries that Jordan Henderson might have replaced Eric Dyer as England's whipping boy / fall guy. My name is Rupert Meadows and I've written and broadcast about all things football on platforms such as TalkSport Radio and Give Me Sport. My co-host Cameron MacDonald has spent 3 years working as an FA licensed intermediary here in the UK. But above all else, we're fans.
Yeah, thanks for that, Rupert. It's now just a few short days until the European Championship kicks off, with Turkey versus Italy taking place this Friday at 8 p.m. On Sunday, England will be starting their campaign with a hotly anticipated rematch against Croatia, who of course knocked England out of the 2018 World Cup. We'll also be having a look at the season in retrospect with the help of our league predictions from back at the start of the year, and whilst there are some teams we had absolutely figured out from day one, there are others where that was less the case. As always, timestamps are in the description, and let's start with what we thought about England's final 2 friendly games ahead of the competition.
Yeah, sure thing. I mean, it feels like, I guess we should start with the first game, which was England versus Austria.
Yeah, I mean, we could look at these games individually, we can look at them sort of as a pair or sort of go back and forth, but England versus Austria, yeah, I mean, it was a pretty muted game. There was one thing, obviously, that was the big, headline grabber. It was that Bukayo Saka played fantastically, obviously he scored the goal, but even before then, he and Jack Grealish were sort of the 2 bright sparks in an England side that was otherwise a bit plodding, a bit pedestrian, and it was interesting because a lot of people, both of us included, when we looked at that 33-man squad, we looked at Bukayo Saka and we went, well, you know, as good as he is and as talented he's been, is it maybe either too soon or are there too many players in that same position? And although he didn't play in the second friendly, he wasn't in the squad, I assume, to being rested. Do you think maybe in this game he sort of played himself into contention for a little cameo at the Euros? Or do you think that was just sort of Gareth's way of going, all right, here you go, fill your boots and you'll be on the bench for the cameras for the rest of the tournament?
I don't know, it's hard to tell because I almost feel like part of this is kind of like, well, it's not justifying his selections, but it's kind of like, well, let's see how a mix of maybe the fringe players who some people weren't sure about, like us, do, like Bukayo Saka, and also, you know, how do some of the players that ended up getting left out, like Jesse Lingard, how did they fare? So I kind of feel like, it's a bit of a mix, wasn't it? I think that he definitely justifies his inclusion in this game alone. I think that we may have underestimated how good he will be in England's system rather than just kind of, I guess, looking at how he was for Arsenal. And we kind of did already say that Bukayo Saka obviously has a little bit of a hard time because Arsenal aren't necessarily the best support going forwards for players to like develop their attacking game.
Yeah, not at the moment, and maybe with England, with a team that can actively sort of, when he makes a great pass, it goes to someone, or he has more players coming into him and sort of providing him with good chances for him to score goals. I did think you touched on there, sort of looking at, there were parts of this game that I really liked in the 11. I really liked that they had the midfield trio of Rice, Bellingham and Grealish, that is what I hope is a little bit more in line with what we take into the tournament. My big fear is that Gareth Southgate is going to go really conservative and play like either a double pivot, or he's going to go for like Rice and Calvin Phillips, which I just think is overkill. So I was encouraged to sort of see like Rice really just holding it down, then a bit more of a number 8 in Bellingham, and then Grealish, who was sort of playing a little bit further back, so a little bit like a double 8 system. But I was quite happy with that, and I hope that we see some variation of that, whether it's Grealish or Grealish is on the wing, so Mount fills that position. But I think these games, on the one hand, you look at them and it can maybe tell us a little bit about how England play at this tournament. On the other hand, it seems to be a bit mixed messages. Obviously, first and foremost, as you said, we saw a lot of players that either you aren't expecting to be in the first team, like Bukayo Saka, or players that haven't made the squad. And I guess you could say, there's 2 ways of looking at it. You could say it's quite good not to reveal things too early and to sort of try and make sure all the key players are well rested. And part of it, of course, is not Gareth Southgate's fault, because a lot of the Chelsea and City and even the United players have sort of come back a little bit later. But it is a little bit concerning to me, like looking at all the other friendlies that are being played. Every time I've seen France play or Germany play or Spain, they're playing pretty close to what you would expect, at least, their tournament 11s are going to be. And England aren't. And so it worries me. Are we going to get to the tournament and everyone else has sort of run their team through the motions and they've all got to know each other, and we're sort of turning up on the day with a team that haven't yet played together, or even like 2-3 games in?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I definitely worry about this. I kind of feel like this is the problem that we talked about last week, which is that England have just quite a experimental, provisional squad and not a really nailed down starting 11. And so they might fall short of being, quite good, like jack of all trades, but master of none. And it's the master of some that win things. So yeah, I do worry that we haven't quite found the balance yet between giving a squad enough time, like a centre-back partnership, for example, enough time to get to know each other, get to know their games and things like that, give them minutes, versus getting all these fringe players action and making them feel like they're a part of it. And yeah, I definitely feel like we're leaning much more on the latter and not nearly enough on the former. So it's something to be concerned about. I guess the only thing that we can take from it really is that, Gareth Southgate really does see it as a 33-man squad. Like, he didn't just do it to keep these players happy. He does see it as being a wider pool of players that he wants to pick his squad from, which can, I guess, only be a good thing in the sense that it kind of motivates these players who are on the fringes to play better, and also the people in the starting lineup to keep playing well, because your position is not safe. But yeah, I do. It worryingly feels like it's maybe falling into what we suspected, which is that they might slightly fall short of our expectations.
Yeah, it just looks a bit indecisive, and there's a whole sort of thing about indecision I want to get into later, so I won't get into it now, but it just, when we have games where we play a player like James Ward-Prowse and Jesse Lingard, both of whom I think should be in the squad, but aren't, what does that really do for the team that they're playing and they're getting the minutes under their belts? Great for them as players, happy for them, but for the actual squad that's going to the tournament, how do you benefit from playing alongside Jesse Lingard? I suppose in some ways he fills in a similar role to a player that might not be playing that day, like maybe a Mason Mount or something who's unavailable. So some have suggested maybe that was Southgate's idea to sort of have him as a role filler. But yeah, it makes me a little bit uneasy that everyone else has sort of been hammering it out and we haven't. And it was the same story again in the second game, the England 1-0 Romania. And these games were both 1-0s. They were both, not exactly blockbuster games. Obviously Romania could have been a 2-0 were it not for Jordan Henderson. Doing something very against the Jordan Henderson character that we've all sort of grown accustomed to, sort of being a bit of a team player, taking the penalty for himself and then failing at executing it, and then afterwards coming out and being like, I've missed more important penalties. That whole saga, I was like, has he been possessed by someone else here?
I agree with you, it felt really out of character, and obviously it's not what you want to see, because the two of us have different opinions on whether or not Jordan Henderson should be in the squad, but the fact that he's in there, you just hope that he will be a good influence in the dressing room. And he kind of touched on the fact that he felt bad for Dominic Calvert-Lewin because he gave him the pen, and I was kind of like, I don't think he did give you the pen. I think you took that pen. But the main thing I felt like we learned from Jordan Henderson is like, this guy needs minutes. Like, he just needs to play more. And so I understand taking on the responsibility. I understand that there's a hierarchy. You have to follow that on the pitch. So in a sense, that kind of is a leadership role that he takes on. That's like him playing the role of Gareth Southgate on the pitch. But it didn't feel like the balance was quite right.
Yeah, and he definitely, I mean, when you say he needs minutes, do you mean as in, like, because he was very clearly not match fit?
Yeah, exactly. And he just feels like he's off the boil, not just in terms of, being on the pitch because of his performances, but also just gauging these moments.
Well, I mean, maybe that was part of why he went for the penalty. Sometimes it's really good to get something to sort of mark your re-entry and sort of boost your confidence, whether it's a goal, whether it's an assist, whether it's a really, industrious performance. But I just think this game, I mean, I voiced my concerns about Jordan Henderson in the squad a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about the 33-man, and I said, a 30-year-old who hasn't played since February coming into the squad, that takes time to get back into full fitness. And we saw in this game he wasn't back to full fitness. I don't trust him to play against Croatia. I think if Jordan Henderson starts against Croatia, we're going to realise half an hour in that we've lost the midfield battle, and by that point it could be too late, and you've lost one of the most important games in the group. And so I think about Jordan Henderson, a lot of these other players. I really liked Roy Keane's comment about Jordan Henderson coming in, because he sort of came out and went, you shouldn't be involved at all, you shouldn't be fit. And sort of Michael Richards and some of the other people were trying to protest. Also, Ian Wright, I think, was trying to protest and be like, like the whole rhetoric, like, he's so good for the squad. And Roy Keane went, I heard people saying they should want him in the squad. For what? Does he do card tricks? Does he have a sing-song? Does he do quizzes in the evening? And that's kind of the line of thought I had. It's like, he's obviously very influential, but is Jordan Henderson off the pitch more impactful to England as a team than someone like James Ward-Prowse or Jesse Lingard on the pitch? That's quite a hard sell for me. And I just think about Jordan Henderson and these injured players. England really do have previous, as a side, about sort of bringing back injured players. Obviously, David Beckham in 2002 was the really obvious one. He was rushed back, having not played for 7 weeks, and just had a really up-and-down tournament. Wayne Rooney in the 2006 tournament, really, really talented player that could just never get up to speed in that tournament. Rooney himself has since said, when sort of talking about that 2006 World Cup, he went, looking back, I should never have gone to that World Cup. If I was in the same position again, I'd rule myself out. So for all the good there is to be said of Jordan Henderson, and indeed Harry Maguire, who's another one I want to talk about, they're nowhere near as impactful as players like Rooney or Beckham were, and even players that were that good, of that lofty calibre, struggled loads coming back from injury. I think Harry Maguire's the other one, and a lot of people have been saying that Harry Maguire might not even play till the knockouts, so he's going to miss the first 3 games. He's not even going to get the sort of potential Jordan Henderson chance of playing himself in, through that. He's going to come in through the knockouts. I just think that is such a massive potential flaw in the defence. I also think, in terms of what it says about our confidence, I really have found it interesting looking at the juxtaposition between the way that England have treated Harry Maguire and the way that Spain, for example, have treated Sergio Ramos. Here in England, we've looked at Harry Maguire, we're desperately clinging onto the chance that he will be able to come back in time for the knockouts. Harry Maguire's been a key England player at 1 tournament. He played 3 games for England before 2018. If he, regains full fitness, we're sort of acting like he's the saviour. On the other hand, you've got Spain, who have looked at Sergio Ramos, who was in a similar situation to Harry Maguire. Sergio Ramos is the most capped Spanish player of all time. He's one of the best defenders of all time. He's won 2 different Euros with Spain, as well as a World Cup. And they've gone, yeah, you're not fit, mate. You're going to do us more harm than good. Now, we might look back at the end of the tournament and go, that was a huge fumble from Spain, but it definitely projects a lot of confidence into the rest of their defensive options. Whereas for us, if you're Tyrone Mings or Conor Cody, they all know going into this, they're second strings to an injured Harry Maguire. We'd rather gamble on Harry Maguire on crutches than trust fully in any of them.
Yeah, see, I guess just the main thing when I look at that kind of juxtaposition, as you said, like the contrast between those two decisions, is I just feel like my argument for Jordan Henderson, yes, was that he was great and in the squad and a good influence in the dressing room. Why can't he just come along? If he's so mature, just include him. But he just isn't in the squad. Like he can be on the plane without. I don't know. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no,
is
I know
that
exactly.
Not like a halfway house that he can have? And I do agree with you because I think another flaw in these 2 games we've seen is that Southgate started 2 different centre-back partnerships. He had Tyrone Mings playing both, so I think we can see that he's probably going to start. But he had Ben White in one, and he had Conor Cody in the other. And, I feel like you need to be giving your centre-back partnership minutes together. You need to have chosen who it's going to be and given them experience together. It's not going to work out if you're just like, well, maybe we'll try this one this time. And it does feel very casual and maybe a little bit lazy. Not lazy, but non-committal. I don't know.
That's the whole thing.
Some definite question marks. I fully agree with you. Some real question marks about us going into this.
That's the whole thing about non-committal, because the sort of the suggestion that Harry Maguire might be fit for the knockout stages. Let's say that England do really well, get through to the knockout stages, and Harry Maguire miraculously is ready to play, and he's fully fit, and he's somehow, without playing football for ages, match fit in time. If England have got to the knockouts by that point and beaten some good teams to get there, do you break up the partnership or the back 3 or whoever it is that have got you to that point and then introduce a new foreign body? Because that as well is a bit of a question mark. If a team has done really well together, let's say these centre-backs do a really good job against Croatia and command a fantastic defence, do you then break that up because Harry Maguire plays for Manchester United and was really good in the 2018 World Cup? Or do you go, well, you've played really well, so you stay in the 11?
I just feel like momentum is so important on an international level because you don't have that, consistent period of training. Like it has to be based on it, what's happening in the weeks building up and in the tournament already. So yeah, I agree with you.
The other thing to consider for England, and this isn't so much Gareth Southgate's fault or anyone's fault really, but that, obviously you've got these injury concerns in Jordan Henderson and Mason Mount. There are also several key players that have not really had much of a chance to train with the tournament. All of these City and Chelsea players who are playing in the Champions League final have only just joined up with the squad at the end of last week. That's Raheem Sterling, Phil Foden, Mason Mount, Ben Chilwell, Reece James, John Stones and Kyle Walker. That's quite a lot. That's over a quarter of the squad of 26 that haven't been able to properly get ready. Add that to Henderson and Maguire, and that's a third of the squad who are either unavailable or not properly ready for England's first game against Croatia, and that really makes me unnerved. Obviously, as well, you could add to that if you wanted United players like Rashford and Shaw. They both started for England against Romania, though, so that's less of a concern for me. But there's a lot of England players, and this one isn't so much anyone's fault because it's not Southgate's fault that 2 English teams did really well, but up to a third of the squad isn't going to be properly ready for the Croatia game. We might end up starting with a weekend 11. We might have to bring and chop and change. It just makes me feel a little bit uneasy.
Well, hey man, let's flip that narrative. Every major tournament, I get so excited, building up about how good England are going to be, how far they're going to get. it's not happening this year. And this year I'm just getting more nervous. So does that mean that I'm not going to be disappointed? I'm going to be pleasantly surprised.
That we're going to go all the way. Well, I mean, that's the other conversation. How far do we think England will go? And I think part of that is down to, what we're expecting from Gareth Southgate. Because the other thing that I'm still trying to figure out, I'm trying to figure out how well England are going to do at this tournament. I'm also trying to figure out how England are going to play. Because England have played with a back four for the last 5 games. The last time they played with a back three was in November, I think, against Iceland. And so they've just played with that back four. It's been Stones and Maguire normally. Obviously, Stones and Maguire, Stones may be available, but he might not have trained enough, and Maguire won't be available. You look at some of the players that have been taken in the squad, particularly with players like Ben White, who have been added back in the squad, Connor Cody, who operates best in a back three, and it looks like we're going to be playing with a back three. But in both of these friendly games, we played with a back four, and I can't really figure out which one of those is true, because logically, if you play a back four in all the games leading up, you would think that, but then the personnel we have, added to the fact that we're like really light in midfield, so that would work if you had a sort of 2-man midfield flanked by full-backs. The fact that we initially brought 4 right-backs makes sense of that as well. What do you think we're gonna look like in the first game?
I don't know. I mean, I kind of agree with you that we fielded 2 very different 11s in these 2 games, but they were both 4-3-3 and a pretty consistent 4-3-3. Obviously, you kind of had Jack Grealish and Jesse Lingard, for example, like dovetailing a little bit. It may be the way that we would imagine, as you kind of implied, Jack Grealish and Mason Mount doing. But yeah, it does feel like in all the sea of changes, the fact that the formation stayed the same is weird, given that the squad would suggest a 3 at the back. I think we probably will play 3 at the back, but again, it just baffles the mind as to why we're not preparing for this major tournament with these friendlies. Like, what is the point of these friendlies? Is it literally just like a pat on the back and a well done to everyone who didn't make it, as you kind of said at the start?
Yeah,
I think we will stay with a 3 at the back, because I think we've kind of overcommitted to that with our squad. Not overcommitted, but I feel like we've definitely leaned into it. So I'd be surprised if we drop to a 4 at the back now, but I guess the door's still open. It's another uncertainty.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. So with all that in mind, how far, putting on our optimistic England hats, because, we've got to do that, how far do you think England go in this tournament? Because there's a lot to be excited about in this squad. We've just sort of moaned for a little bit about all these injury concerns and players coming in, but actually, there is a lot to get excited about. We've got so much really interesting talent up front. Players like Jack Grealish and Phil Foden, who have been playing out of their minds at times this season. Harry Kane, who is having his best season yet for a Spurs side that's been a bit spluttering. Now he's going to be playing with an England side. If that's how good Harry Kane is being serviced by the lads at Spurs, imagine how good he's going to be playing with Grealish and Foden and Mason Mount behind him, who have all been absolutely fantastic this season. And another thing we sort of mentioned in the other episode is, like, you look at that front 3 for England, whatever your first choice front 3 would be, if all 3 of those players couldn't play, you could just line up another really exciting front 3. Dominic Calvert-Lewin's been looking really good this season as well, so if Kane is fatigued and can't play against Scotland or something, he'd be a really interesting option. Jadon Sancho coming in, even Raheem Sterling and Marcus Rashford, who've been, out of form towards the back end of the season, are capable of putting up good performances sometimes. So there is a lot to get excited about, for me, I think. So how are you feeling about it? Are you feeling optimistic? Are you feeling pessimistic? Where does the weighing up of the scales go for you?
I know what you mean. I agree with all that you've said. It's an exciting squad. I do just worry that we don't know how to win. In terms of like that collective mindset, I do worry that we don't have a winner's mindset. And the squad is just so unprepared in terms of like how much they play together as a unit. My optimistic hat, we lose in the final. My pessimistic hat, we're out in the quarters. I kind of feel like might be somewhere in the middle. Maybe we get to the semis and then drop out again like we did in the World Cup. But I do feel like I would be very pleasantly surprised if we made it all the way. I just feel like we're not quite there yet.
One of the things that I've seen almost no one talking about, and I don't know if this is because people know but they don't really want to talk about it because it suddenly puts a big rain cloud over England's chances, or if people just haven't realised it yet, is that England are in Group D. And so what that means is that if they finish top of the group, they'll be facing the second place team from Group F. And Group F is the group of death that has France, Portugal, Germany and Hungary in it. So if England do really well in the groups, their reward is in all likelihood, playing one of the biggest teams in the tournament. It's a bit of a booby prize. If they finish second in the group, they'll result in sort of playing against the second place team from Group E, which is a group that consists of Spain, Sweden, Poland, and Slovakia. So you could be playing against, Kylian Mbappe and Karim Benzema. Or if you finish second, don't worry, there's still a chance you could be playing against Robert Lewandowski, and Harry Maguire's going to be limping on to play against him.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't make for exciting reading, does it? But at the same time, I guess we're going to have to play them at some point. And if you can make it out your group and have done well, hopefully you got the momentum behind you slightly better than a team that finished second. So, it's
well, it's that combination that makes me nervy. All this talk about like this player's going to be fit for the knockouts and we'll play them into form and etc. etc. It makes me really worried thinking about sort of like battling through with all these, like, best case scenario, you've got all these players who've got a little bit of a question mark over them, like Tyrone Mings and Conor Cody, for example, putting in a really, really good performance, and then we go, great, we've gone on to the knockouts, on you go, here's your pay packet, in comes John Stones and Harry Maguire to face against Lewandowski, and Harry Maguire's like, he plays like Jordan Henderson played against Romania and just gets absolutely run ragged.
Oh god, it's horrifying.
It's a nervy combination.
I mean, I think such as like the confidence that we have based on these last two games is that I do just wonder whether or not Gareth Southgate is watching these games and just thinking like, oh crap, shouldn't have brought along Jordan, should have been James Ward-Prowse. But that hindsight is 20/20. I'm sure I still think we'll do well. I think we'll do well. I don't think we will hit the heady heights of challenging to win, but I hope that we will continue to make progress, or feel like we're continuing to make progress, by which I mean, if we lose at any point, but I feel like we've got a really stronger sense of identity as a team, I'll still be happy. Even if that's out in the quarters to, France or Portugal. I'll still be happy if I feel like, we've done ourselves proud. But yeah, I think my estimate is semis and we're out.
Yeah, I hope so. My only hope is, I think it's kind of hard to say without knowing how Gareth can play. My only hope, I have two sort of wish lists for England. Everything else is great. My first is that Jack Grealish plays every game that he's fit for. I think the only thing that fans should be booing at England games is Jack Grealish not starting, and that's final. And I also think that if we play that double pivot, it's just I can just see, I've been chatting to a mate about that first Croatia game, and he's just like, you can imagine Rice, Phillips, Henderson, all just sort of, good players all, but all sort of just playing the ball around the midfield and everyone going, oh my god, I can't believe Harry Kane's getting no sniff of the ball and the wingers aren't getting anything. and then Croatia just break away and score and win 1-0. I just don't want to be subjected to that, because I just think that'll be dull. I think there's so many. I hope that Gareth breaks convention and is really ambitious and daring, because that's the other thing. Much like we talked about the other day about how if England sort of don't fully reach potential and don't get the semis, don't win or whatever, anything like that, you can still look at certain young players coming through and be really excited about it. In much the same way, if England fall, but they've put on some really good football, and we can look at players like Phil Foden and Jack Grealish, the future of England, that you can still take something away. If we fall because we played really conservative, boring football, it's a lose-lose.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, listening to you say all that just kind of gives me that impression again, which is that Gareth Southgate as a manager is going to be the reason why all of these great young players come through and are kind of guided through this process, but also is going to be our ceiling, because you're saying like, oh, I hope he's daring, I hope he's ambitious. Like, that's not him. He's stable. And
the waistcoat was daring.
That's what it's been good, because we've needed that. Like, we've needed this like encouraging presence to transition these players that he's managed from under 21s into the starting lineup, because they're going to be the future of England. But I do also just feel like, I don't think he has it in him to make those bold decisions, to do those daring tactics that will break up Croatia's counterattack. Like, I just don't see him having it in him. And please, Gareth, prove me wrong. But I agree with you. I don't know, not for me.
I think quarterfinals. I think we're getting knocked down in the quarterfinals. It'll be a really sort of like cagey game against a Poland or a Sweden or something in the round of 16 after we finish second, and then we'll get through to the quarters, and then we'll play like one of the big guns and just get absolutely battered.
Yeah, fair. I mean, to be fair, like, that's kind of what happened in the World Cup. I mean, we were pretty lucky to get to the semis. That game against Colombia could have easily gone either way. And in the same way, it's got that little bit about it, doesn't it? That like game against a Sweden or a Poland, you can really see that going the same way. And then if it goes to penalty shootout, like it's just anyone's guess.
Yeah, it really is. Shall we move into a bit of useless trivia before we have a Premier League table recap and have a look at the season in review? I've got one for you this week, actually, which is based on one of the first signings of the window we've seen. Aston Villa have been just wasting no time at all. They signed Emiliano Buendia this week, who obviously a very highly rated player, plays at Norwich, was really good last time he was in the Premier League. And a big part of the deal of why he came over was because he shares an agent with fellow Argentine Emiliano Martinez, so that sort of helps expedite the deal. But the fact that Aston Villa have both Buendia and Martinez means that they now own 67% of the Emilianos ever to play Premier League football. The only one they're missing out is former Liverpool player Emiliano Insua.
It's a great statistic.
Truly useless.
Can Emiliano Insua, is he still playing? Can he come out of retirement for this?
He is still playing.
Have you made inquiries?
He is still playing. He is 32 years old and playing, I believe, in the Argentinian league. But they might get him on loan just to have 100% Emiliano.
Have you? I don't know. Have you written to Dean Smith? Have you?
I have, but I keep getting those email bounce back things.
I have. He won't. He will no longer take my calls. Well, fair play. That is a fun one.
What have you got for us?
I'm excited to see them in the same lineup.
Mm.
That's for sure. My statistic is similarly related to things that happened on and off the pitch this week. I looked at some penalties and how the penalty kick came to be in the form that we know it to be, and quite a fun thing that I did not know before was that did you know that the penalty spot was invented as a money saving technique? Before that, in the 1890s, it was created as a penalty line, parallel with the goal, and you could shoot it from anywhere along the line. And then, in order to try and save money on paint, in 1902, they introduced it as just a penalty spot in the middle instead.
Oh, that's kind of a shame. Now there's more money in the game, they should bring back the line. I quite like the idea of more variance in penalties.
Ready for the line. Imagine just taking it in line with like the left hand post. I feel like there'd be a lot more gamesmanship going on with trying to mess with the goalkeeper. Just like put it back post. To be fair, you'd also get like, I don't know. Yeah, I agree. Maybe a little bit more space to curl one in. I agree. More tactics.
# bring back the penalty line, I say. Looking next.
Well, if you take anything from this, let it be that.
Looking next at our season in review, for any of our long-term listeners or anyone who is familiar with football podcasts as a concept, at the start of the season we did predict what we thought would happen in this Premier League table, and some things we got very right, other things we got very wrong. So what we're going to do is we're going to run down the Premier League table and just have a look at some of the things that we thought about these teams that might happen and whether things were different. Because it has been a very weird season. And as a result, some things changed a lot and other things were exaggerated a lot. So starting off with Manchester City, who finished first. I had them finishing first place. I did think they were going to go up. Rupert, you had them finishing third. What made you think, again, that Man City sort of couldn't do it? And why do you think that analysis didn't quite live up to their season?
It's a good question. I mean, I definitely think that this is going to be an exercise in humility, if anything else. I feel like, for me, the first thing that I would say is that if you look at the table this season versus last season, the winning points was 86 points for Man City, and last season it was 99 points for Liverpool. So, in part, I think we can kind of see this season as just having been like just slightly less high quality in terms of like who ran away with the title. City were very strong for large periods of it, had a great season, but also no one really challenged them. So I would kind of chalk City finishing top in part to, them not having as much competition. I think that, a lot of the problems that I saw in City's squad haven't really been solved. They just kind of managed to paper over the cracks enough to have like a solid time. So, for example, they still haven't really replaced Fernandinho, but they managed to get by with, a combination of him and Rodri, and, they haven't replaced Sergio Aguero, but again, they managed to get by for the most part with a combination of different false nines and using just as many attacking midfielders as Pep can get his hands on. So I kind of feel like part of it is related to like what happened elsewhere. Part of it was maybe, me not giving enough credit to how strong Pep's squad really is, because for all of their failings and the slight dips in like the strength of their starting 11, their best starting 11, you can also look at, how good the players that they have on their bench at all times and how they can impact the game during the game. So I would say a combination of, just not backing them enough for like the squad that they have and how good Pep is as a manager, I guess, but also, not really any challenges to them.
Yeah, I agree with that, and it's interesting you raised there Man City's points total relative to other champions, and also the fact that not a lot of people challenge them, because that's an argument I have for a team that we're going to talk about in just a second. But I think for City, while that is true, it is also true that Man City have the most squad depth of any team in the league by far, and we knew that going in. And I remember talking to you at the time about how we were coming into this season screaming off the back of a massively long season. Again, it's almost like we've played a double season, and I remember just being like, I think City will run away with it because Liverpool might have the best 11 in the league, but City have the best squad. And I think that was the difference, because as we saw with Liverpool, a lot of injuries and things like that, whereas City were able to weather things like De Bruyne being out or Aguero being out. But yeah, so
yeah, definitely. You were right. You're absolutely right. So, I mean, bang on from you. Got to give you credit where it is deserved. And I think I just thought that, I put Liverpool first, as we'll get to later. I did not foresee the massive problems that they've had in a way that you did. So, fair play.
Moving into second place, we both thought that this team, Manchester United, would finish fourth. So we both got that one wrong. And this is sort of the one I was thinking about when you talked about that, City finishing on 86 points, because I think where City sort of got that advantage because they have such a deep squad, United sort of just had a good year, but not a great year. And we're just lucky that that Chelsea and Liverpool kind of just fell off. It reminded me a lot of that season. Remember when Leicester won the league and Arsenal finished second, playing wholly unspectacular football, and it was just because everyone else was having a bit of an off year. And I did think with that, I had a look, and United finished second with 74 points. They were 12 points off the champions. And if you look at the league tables for the last 5 seasons, 74 points on average would net you fourth place, which is what we both had them for. So, not claiming that to be right. But yeah, no, I just think, even now, I thought it was more of a Chelsea and Liverpool being off. Obviously, this depends on transfers. If they manage to sort of get Kane instead of City, or they get Grealish or Sancho or something like that, they could challenge next season. But even now, despite the fact that United finished second, when I look at the top 4 and I imagine them all at full strength, I still think United are the 4th strongest of those teams.
Yeah, that's reasonable. I think the main thing that we're going to see is, like, yes, no team really ran away with it, but also the pack was a lot closer this year. So, it was interesting because I was listening back to when we were predicting things, and you kind of said, like, you made the point that you thought that there were going to be less clubs kind of floundering this season, really struggling. And obviously there have been 1 or 2, but I would say that, the main bulk of the table is a lot more clumped up than it was last year. So, for example, 6th place Tottenham Hotspur last year on 59 points. They finished 7th place this year, but they had 62 points. So, yeah, I think you're right that United were just kind of, I don't know, they were solid. I think that they just kind of ticked along. We maybe didn't give them enough credit for ticking along fairly consistently. They did pretty well at grinding out results against the lower teams, and I guess that is just how you do well in a league is, you just win more games and grind out more draws than other teams.
Yeah, they were second place for 20 weeks, and I just think it was one of those seasons, as you were saying, because the table is so clumped up, that was just because everyone was beating everyone, and the only team that wasn't losing to everyone, because they liked a good 0-0 draw here and there, was United managed to grind that out, and I think it was that same, we talked about it with the whole sort of Solskjaer's effectiveness debate, the fact that they ground out so many 0-0s is part of the reason they were second, and I mean that both in terms of the fact that they weren't lower, and also that they weren't higher.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, you can look at a lot of other teams that finished near the top, and you can say that, like, at this point in their season, they had a dip. So, obviously Chelsea went through a really bad period of form. Leicester had so many injuries that there was a couple of stop and start moments. West Ham didn't start well. Tottenham Hotspur definitely fell off for periods. Manchester United were, fairly consistent.
Pretty consistent indeed. In third place in the table finished Liverpool, and you had them winning the league, which was very reasonable given the season they just had, looking really imperious. I actually had them as third, which I'm quite happy about. What I'm very happy about is that I remember I was listening back for some of the notes. In the conversation we had, I said verbatim, if we see Henderson or Van Dijk get injured for a long period of time, it could change their fortunes, and coming right off the back of this season, there will be a lot of injuries like that. And I think like 3 weeks later, Van Dijk, and then Henderson later got injured. I think Liverpool, it was just not a good year for them. And I think there is a positive for that for Liverpool fans, because back when we're a little bit more in the normal flow of things and there's not stop starts and there's not really packed schedules because of coronavirus reshuffling and all that sort of thing, they might look back at their best. And I do expect them to, not have to have a last gasp to make third as they did. But I think they should use this season and the issues they've had to sort of advise how they work in this window, because it was a concern that a lot of people had, Liverpool fans or not, looking at that team and going, they rely a lot on a very small group of players. If there's an injury crisis, it'll hit them a lot harder than it'll hit like a Chelsea or a Man City. And it sure did.
Yeah, it sure did. So, I mean, again, hats off to you for that one. I think it's interesting because obviously we talk about narrative a lot, and football is so much about narrative, and a lot has been made of, the fact that Liverpool managed to finish third in the end and leapfrog Chelsea and Leicester towards the very end of the season. And, kind of, I guess, slightly fun being poked at Man U for being like, oh, you had your best season for 8 years and Liverpool had their worst season, and, Liverpool only finished 5 points below you. But when you look at the fact that Liverpool got 30 points less than last year, it just is a bad season. Like, you just can't get around that.
That's insane. Huge drop off.
The third, it's like a third. So I mean, you called it.
I do hope, just for, as a neutral football fan, because it's always good to watch these good teams, I do hope and I do think that they'll be slightly better to their former glory, because obviously there were things beyond injuries. I do think that a lot of the players who looked bad this season that weren't injured, it's just fatigue. So I hope that, someone like Trent Alexander-Arnold, for example, not going to the Euros, or even Jordan Henderson, if he doesn't get much playing time. If you're a Liverpool fan who's also an England fan, at the moment you might be thinking like, I really want to see my boys play for England. Might be a blessing in disguise, honestly, when the next season rolls around, if they've had a good rest.
Yeah, fair play. I mean, to be fair, I still am surprised, because you look at Liverpool's squad, and yes, obviously their starting 11 is really good, but it kind of felt like they'd strengthened decently. Like, Adrian as a backup keeper is pretty solid, And when you look at the midfield, like Oxlade-Chamberlain, even like young players coming through, like Woodburn, Curtis Jones, Shea Ojo, these players all could have had a great time. And Xherdan Shaqiri on the bench, Diogo Jota on the bench, Thiago being brought in. Like, they had options. It just didn't work. They just didn't seem to be able to work out how to play. And we saw so many different, like, defensive partnerships, for example, being tried. And Jurgen Klopp, I would say, like, deserves at least, we've got to criticise him in the same breath as we talk about how they struggled with injuries, because he did not do well when things didn't go his way.
No, I agree, but I think it's you live by the Klopp, you die by the Klopp. His managerial style has always been, he likes working with a small group of players. When Liverpool were riding high, he wasn't so worried about integrating those players into the squad and making sure they sort of trained as backups, because he was sort of riding the high of Liverpool being amazing, and they really were amazing. But then it meant that when sort of there was a spoke caught in the wheel, there was no spare tyre. So I think, swings and roundabouts, really.
I guess I just feel like, it's the reason why they did so well, but also, it's kind of why a lot of his teams can flatter to deceive, because if you're only working with a small group of players, but you're demanding this really high intensity football, like this incredibly aggressive press, like, you're just going to get injuries. And if you're not working with a large group of players, then you're always going to struggle at some point or other. You're always going to come unstuck, which is why, you could probably look at his Dortmund and say, that's why you didn't quite hit the heights that you could have done, that you should have done. So is his strength also his weakness? Maybe.
Yeah, I think he's sort of, it's interesting because at Dortmund we didn't see the step after the whole injury crisis thing, because his Dortmund side did really, really well, then succumbed to a lot of injuries. Liverpool have done really, really well, succumbed to a lot of injuries. Now we're going to get to see that next step of Klopp that we haven't seen before. We didn't see it as Dortmund, we didn't see it as Mainz, because both times he left the job. So it'll be interesting to see if Liverpool can bounce back, or if it's sort of that, not wounded pride, but they've just sort of just lost some of the spark, and City have sort of regained their supremacy, and Chelsea are sort of thinking, well, they can be beaten now. Because there was a point last season when, people thought that Liverpool might go unbeaten because they really just did seem impossible to defeat. And that's kind of been enthusiastically dispelled this season, that notion. Looking
that is for sure, yeah.
Looking
fourth place
at the fourth place team, but our second place team, this is another one we agreed on. We said that Chelsea would finish second, and we actually both agreed that it was going to go one or two ways for them. We said they would either finish fourth or just fall short of the title, and fourth was actually what ended up happening, and we'd locked in second. And I think a big part of the reason was that we sort of both thought about Chelsea that they might have another Conte-esque season, a real season of two halves. And that is what happened. I think where we both fell really, really short in our prediction of Chelsea's season is that there was no predicting quite hard how Timo Werner would flop. Because I think we looked at a lot of those players and we thought Kai Havertz might take a bit of time to settle in, but I think he'll hit the ground running eventually. And I think that's kind of true. And we went, one of those players probably won't really work out. Maybe Hakim Ziyech, and that was kind of true. We just did not expect Timo Werner to not be able to hit the side of a barn.
Yeah, true. I mean, and that did definitely cost Chelsea a lot of points. I feel like one of the things we kind of thought collectively was just that, there was a chance that, for example, Mason Mount could play so well that he keeps out players like Hakim Ziyech, and then Ziyech struggles to kind of, I guess, get settled. But I feel like we maybe we kind of predicted, that Ziyech and those other players would be hot on Mount's heels, but that was not quite the case.
Yeah, it was a lot of very, very nearly prophecy. A lot of these things Mount's going to really improve, and that's why he'll keep them out. Mount did improve. He didn't need to.
Yeah, I mean that's true. He probably could have had his Derby form and still kept several high profile players on the bench or worse.
I do think, much like Chelsea with Conte, or Chelsea with a lot of managers that they have, where this cycle always happens, I think next season Chelsea may well be challenging for the title. Again, it depends how they and the other teams act in the market, but it just seems like since Tuchel took over, they've been getting better and better and better every week, and obviously they have the Champions League now to prove it, but they just... It's scary to think about what they'll look like next season, especially if they get Haaland as apparently one of the players they're chasing in the market.
Well, yeah, definitely. I mean, not to jump the gun, but he's going to be a 2-horse race, a 3-horse race with Liverpool and City, a 4-horse race with Man U.
I mean, of those players, United could go nuts in the window, but I still think, honestly, if I look at those top 4 teams, I would say the 3 that are not United ahead of United, for now anyway.
United get Kane. It's a different story.
It's a very different story indeed. The 5th place team is one of the first ones where we really, really diverge from the table. So far, we sort of had the top 4 and the top 4. Leicester City finished 5th. Where we thought they'd finish was very different. This is one of my worst shouts. I thought they'd finish 10th place. Because I looked at Leicester, and obviously last season they had that massive collapse. They sort of combined all the injuries they had going into the season. They had all these sort of key players that were out and about. And I just thought they were going to be in trouble. And I had real question marks over the ability of loads of their deputy players sort of come in. Interestingly enough, what actually happened with Leicester was a season that saw standout performances from all these second string players. Harvey Barnes was amazing. James Justin was amazing. Kelechi Iheanacho, who I think, at City was sort of seen as a young prospect that might be exciting, by this season had sort of been written off as one of those that was never going to make it, came out of nowhere and scored, just a hatful of goals. And then, of course, Wesley Fofana arrived and blew everyone away as well. So I had them as 10th, but they were actually 5th. Where did you have them?
So I had Leicester in 8th, and we kind of talked a little bit about, you were saying I'm worried that Leicester are over-reliant on Vardy, and I didn't disagree. I kind of maybe was arguing that I thought that players like Harvey Barnes would be a little bit more impactful this season, and they were, but, I couldn't account for how well they performed despite the amount of injuries that they had. I mean, this is surely some sort of statistical anomaly that just has to be admired, confused, but do you know what I mean? I just feel like it's... Well,
I think what it shows is
they defied expectations, definitely.
I think what it shows is sort of the inverse of what we were just talking about with Liverpool there. Liverpool sort of hadn't adequately groomed a crop of second stringers to take up for the first team when they've fallen out. And clearly at Leicester they absolutely had, because all these key players kept getting injured and kept going out. Even players who were sort of key parts of that squad throughout the season, like your Ndidis and your Madisons, even when they came out of the squad for their little portions, because pretty much everyone at Leicester missed 10 games or so at some point, they didn't get hit that hard. Obviously, their big weakness was, ironically, kind of when they had a lot of the players back, they then did do their classic Leicester collapse at the end, and once again everyone was going, oh, they're going to finish third, are they going to finish fourth? And they fell outside the top four again, but didn't fall quite as low as 10th or 8th.
Well, it is what it is. I mean, hats off to Brendan Rodgers as well, because he's had a great season, and I mean, it's an exciting Leicester squad. I'm excited to see where they end up, because it kind of feels like they're just here to stay now. That they're going to be in contention. Maybe not for the trophy, but for top four, definitely.
I think they will try and kick on. Another team looking to kick on, and a team that we thought was going to do appalling. This is another team that there are two teams that have changed the most this season. There's sort of two Cinderella stories, and that's West Ham and Aston Villa. And both of these teams were flirting with relegation that last season. Came into the season, we both thought they'd do terribly. I thought West Ham were going to finish 15th. They did enjoy a bit of a purple patch at the back end of last season, but it was just hard to ignore some of the weaknesses they had. They had no real reliable star quality. All the players they had that you would expect to turn to, like Antonio or Pablo Fornals or Aaron Cresswell, were just too injury prone or too inconsistent. But what actually happened was they came in, got a bit more consistent. They had loads of really confident early results, like their 3-0 win away against Leicester. They had draws against Spurs and Man City immediately following that. And the big performance like Declan Rice and Thomas Souček and lonely Jesse Lingard were also the big stars. The whole side really raised their level after flirting with relegation, which was really impressive. I think a big part of that as well was something that we talked about in the Jesse Lingard episode, bringing in Kevin Nolan as a first-team coach in February 2020. If you actually look at West Ham's form before he joined as a first-team coach and after, it's night and day. I thought 15th, underestimating the chicken dancing man to my own detriment, and they finished 6th.
Well, I mean, this is going to be my worst prediction in the whole thing, because I actually had them finishing 20th, not just in the relegation zone, but rock bottom. And I just kind of felt like it's not where I wanted to see them, but where I worried that they would end up, because there was just such a negative energy going into the season. If you remember, they just sold Damari Gray to, not Damari Gray, who am I thinking of?
Sebastian Haller.
No, Dean Garner.
Oh, yeah.
To Grady Diangana to West Brom, and their captain Mark Noble had come out publicly and said, like, I did not support the decision. I'm really disappointed. And they did start well, but the first two games they lost 2-0 to Newcastle at home, and then they had a really disappointing performance against Arsenal and lost 2-1. And I was kind of worried that, they weren't really going to be able to turn things around. And then, bang, they beat Wolves 4-0 in the third round of the Prem. And they just didn't really look back from that. They beat Leicester 3-0 away. They drew 3-3 with Tottenham. And just suddenly they were, flying. They drew with Man City. They ran Liverpool really close. And they became, quite quickly, this really exciting team. And, they picked up a couple of great signings. Jesse Lingard, obviously, is the one that springs to mind the most for his performances in the second half of the season. But
Vladimir Coufal
very happy
as well
to be proved wrong, because exactly. I mean, I like West Ham for the squad that they have. I think they've got an exciting crop of players, and they've kind of had a couple false dawns with players like Felipe Anderson and players they brought in from the continent like Lanzini. And Haller even, someone who was a big money signing, high profile signing, who maybe hasn't found that run of form, that consistency that he would be hoping for. But I was dead wrong.
Yeah, well, I mean, to be fair, it sounds, looking at it now, it sounds like a really weird call, but at the time it made a lot of sense to think that West Ham were going to have a really tough time, and bottom sounds really harsh, but they were flirting with relegation, and the wheels did look like they were coming off with a lot of the stuff going on there. So, seems really bad now, but honestly, I kind of get the logic. Looking at...
Well, I mean, I guess like the main thing to say is like, we made these predictions before the window had closed right at the beginning of the season. So, it didn't account for any sort of like last minute bringing in. So, for example, we're talking about Aston Villa later, but we made our predictions before even Martinez joined the club. So there are going to be a couple of moments where we have to look a little sheepish, shuffle our feet, and say, "Yep, we were wrong."
Barely sheepish for me. I think if there's any fan alive that looks you in the eye and tells you that at the end of last season they would have expected Jesse Lingard to go to West Ham and spur them on to a 6th place finish, they are a liar.
Yeah, I mean this is also true.
Looking at Tottenham, and Tottenham are there are a few clubs that I have like this that, we can chat about if there's a big variance, but Tottenham finished 7th. I thought they'd finished 8th. So sort of the commentary about why they didn't finish there, I think, whereabouts do you have them, around that sort of same area?
I had them 9th, yeah.
So around this, I think we both looked at Tottenham and thought it's another year outside the top 6. I think in contrast to that whole Lingard West Ham thing where no one would have said that, I think every single football fan alive was expecting a Mourinho meltdown. Harry Kane had a much better season than everyone was expecting. Obviously he's a fantastic player, but he really just did himself proud this season, but the squad just lost too many key games, despite Harry Kane. So bit of a disappointing season from Spurs in one respect, and another, I think we all saw it coming. It was just that Harry Kane managed to propel them to 7th instead of to 8th or 9th.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the main thing that we thought when we put them lower than they ended up was just that we didn't think it was going to work with Jose Mourinho. Players like Dele Alli weren't really going to, thrive under him. Ndombele might not get the best out of him, like Serge Aurier might not. And there are a lot of players that you just look at and you think, like, you're not Mourinho player. So I definitely get why we thought what we did. And I agree with you that Kane was just really that good that he elevated them above even what we imagined he would elevate them.
All the way to the lofty position of 7th. The next team to talk about, I'm actually quite interested to talk about, because not only did we both think that they were going to finish in the same position, much higher than they were, but also just because there's a really interesting trend about this team, and that team is Arsenal. They finished 8th. You and I both thought they would finish in 5th place. And the reason I want to talk about Arsenal is because Arsenal made us think they were going to finish 5th last season, because they finished the season in really strong fashion under Mikel Arteta. And what's interesting about that is that just in terms of results, I don't think in terms of the football, but just in terms of results, Arsenal have finished this season in quite the same way. There was that whole stat last season that in just 2020 of that last season, Arsenal were 4th place from all those results. And in this season, since Christmas, Arsenal were 3rd. And it's just an interesting one to me because it's kind of like Mikel Arteta as the bizarro Brendan Rodgers. Brendan Rodgers starts amazingly well and then the wheels fall off.
Yeah.
And Mikel Arteta starts with a car scraping against the pavement and sort of puts the wheels on. And then the next season starts and he somehow removes them again.
Yeah, you're right. It's funny, isn't it? I don't really know what that's about. I mean, I think the main thing I would say about Arsenal, having watched them this season, is just that they don't have enough dynamism. They don't have enough energy behind them. They don't have enough of an identity to be able to take games by the scruff of the neck, which means that they just leave them open for way too long, which means that, if a team has a really good 20 minutes against them in the first half, they can be 1-0 or 2-0 down by half time. But yeah, I mean, I kind of, it's interesting because the fact that he finishes stronger, you almost kind of think that, he's finally got a grasp on the squad and things are moving in the right direction, and then suddenly it drops off again. So,
but the weird thing is that every time Arsenal start doing well, every time they sort of seem to find a system that works, the season ends, this is sort of what happened this time and what looks to be happening now next time. I'll get into that in a sec. But sort of Arsenal finished that season really strongly. Obviously, they won an FA Cup as well. They had a good league record under Arteta. And they did that sort of playing with that back three and playing sort of with wing backs that sort of bombed in the channels and that sort of thing. And they sort of abandoned that quite early into this season, and it started to go poorly. Now Arsenal have sort of found themselves with a system that's worked a little bit better. They've finally gone back to using a number 10. They've realised that not having creativity doesn't work, because they sort of had that midfield three for it didn't work, and these results have sort of started to perk up. And now you look at Arsenal in the transfer window and the kind of players they're after. Apparently they're chasing after, they didn't sort of properly chase after Buendia, who would have been a good one. They're chasing after Ruben Neves, who would probably complete their midfield three. So it looks like, again, Mikel Arteta's going, well, the season's gone really well, but I've got to make sure I disappoint all the fans and just throw it all away in the first 6 months.
Yeah, look, I kind of feel like the reason why they finished strongly was because they seemed to kind of find some sort of dubious balance in the attack. So, players like Pepe finishing the season strongly, Emil Smith-Rowe and Martin Odegaard collectively making up one decent attacking midfielder. And you do just wonder whether or not... to be fair, I kind of do agree that their defensive midfield still could do with some improvement because, if at the very least Thomas Partey hasn't had the impact that he would have wanted to have. So I don't see anything wrong with getting someone in like Nicola Pepe because, I don't think Mohamed El Neni should be starting games and Danny Ceballos has left.
Yeah, I don't think Arsenal's problem is that they couldn't use another midfielder to play alongside Thomas Partey. But the thing with them earlier in the season, that even if it was your first game watching football that you could tell, was that they needed a 10. And their good form has sort of coincided with Odegaard coming in and Emil Smith-Rowe playing there a bit more. And just as that started to work, it looks like Arteta's going, well, that was a great experiment. Back to dross.
Yeah, fair. I mean, I kind of... Where I think Ruben Neves could be good is that, he starts attacks from deep. I think he could be a really solid transitional player between the defence, the midfield and the attack. So in that sense, I think it could be a really handy signing. But I do get what you mean that, yes, maybe not quite.
I don't think he's a good player.
Going in the right way.
He's a good player. It's just one of those signings that I'm like, why are Arsenal signing him? There are loads of teams, if I looked at that, I'd go, okay, that's quite interesting. Like, if Man United were interested in him, I'd be like, that's maybe an interesting signing, but Arsenal? That's not the signing they did at all.
See, weirdly, I would pivot that and say, like, if Man U were going after him, I'd think, like, why? They've got such a stacked midfield. They don't even use Donny van de Beek. Fred looks good again. Pogba looks good again. Like, what are you doing with Ruben Neves? So, yeah, it's funny to hear the perspectives.
Donny van de Beek, by the way, who's missing the Euros through injury. Did you see this?
Ah, poor guy.
I know. The guy cut. When did he get injured? During the 15 seconds he played for United this season.
All I can think is that, like, he was just, like, the coldest man ever. Starting like international training, it just wasn't match fit in the slightest because he hasn't played any matches.
Yeah, very possibly. Looking at our 9th place, and I think we'll have to wrap up at 10 because we're running quite close to time and then do our other 10 next time. But looking at number 9 next, and I'm so glad that I got this team right because I have been banging on since they came up about how will I understand this team. 9th place, and I predicted this team was 9th place, Leeds United. And the funniest part about it was when I was talking about Leeds, I remember saying another verbatim thing. I went, there'll be a point this season when Leeds beat Man City. That's just a fact. And sure they did. They didn't even lose to Man City in the league this season. As expected, they were a team that came into the Premier League and they just played like they'd never been out of it. They took games to opponents. Obviously, they beat teams like Man City, Tottenham and Leicester as well. And they kept up their intensity to the very end of the season. I remember the sort of Karen Carney rhetoric was a little bit flawed, was that they would sort of have a bit tiring out and then sort of start to flop, which is what she sort of was saying they were doing in the Championship. But actually, they finished off the campaign with 4 wins in a row. I did think that there were things to be improved with them. I think the fearless nature, as entertaining and amazing as it was sometimes attacking big games like that really came back to bite them, like when they lost 4-1 to Leicester or 6-2 to Man United. But a really good first season back. There were loads of players that had really good standout years. Rafinha came in and looked right at home. Stuart Dallas, obviously, we've talked a lot about as a player we love. Patrick Bamford, for me, is one that it's almost like not chic to talk about him as being really interesting, maybe because he's like not so much just a Leeds player, because there's that remembrance of him playing for sort of Middlesbrough and Chelsea and all those other and Crystal Palace and teams like that. But I think that's almost more impressive. He's like failed to make his mark in the Premier League before, and there were always question marks over him coming up. So if everyone looked at him in the Championship and went, well, he scored 16 goals, that's all right, but is he going to be one of those players like a Mitrovic or a Pukki that comes up and it's just Waterstown just leveled down in the Championship? He came up and scored 17 league goals this season, that's firmly declaring yourself Premier League quality.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I would say that Patrick Bamford is one of the reasons why I was wrong to put them 10th and not 9th, because I just looked at kind of things like his chance conversion rate at I think it was like around 10%, and just thought that, you get way less chances in the Premier League. He's not going to be as prolific as he had been, and he proved me wrong. I definitely think that he outperformed himself in the sense that, if you run that season like 10 times, I think maybe this one was that 1 in 10. But yeah, credit where it's due. I definitely underestimated his potential to really impact games. He did just take games by the scruff of the neck and dominate them. So absolutely fair play to him. And what excites me about Leeds, because, obviously we like Leeds on this podcast, is that they've shown glimpses of having a different sort of win in them. It's not just that they have to throw everything in the kitchen sink at them and be really exciting. They, towards the end of the season, played some really solid defensive matches. They ground out a 0-0 draw against Chelsea. They ground out a 0-0 draw against Man U. They beat Man City by grinding out a 2-1 win, despite going down to 10 men. So I do feel like, this is a team that's growing, that's evolving, and starting to pick up new strings to their bow. So I wouldn't be surprised if they finish, 7th or 8th this next season, if not higher, maybe.
It's definitely an interesting thing because they did that sort of taking the games to teams and playing really excitably and fearlessly was something that characterised sort of the early part of their season, and then as they sort of grew into the season, they realised that they sometimes had to play a bit more conservatively, and they were sort of playing at some of these sides that really could punish them, and they did adapt their game to that. It's funny because I agree about your point about Patrick Bamford, about if you ran this season again 10 times, you wouldn't get the same numbers, but I also wouldn't be surprised if he had a really good season next season, because I think of what he did, like he got into a lot of good positions and got a lot of chances, and he loved missing a lot of chances. But I think now that he's sort of figured out the bit that he can do, he also knows what he has to work on. And the fact that he's sort of managed to cobble together a season where he scored 17 goals and had a really, really good year suggests to me that if he goes away and works really hard, as he obviously does after getting sort of rebuffed by all these clubs and having to go down to the Championship and work his way back up, he could continue to be. I mean, he's 27 years old. That's about the age when you start to hit your prime. And I think he really could, if he keeps his head down. I'm sure he'll probably be spurred on by having not made the Euros, and he'll be keen to try and make the squad for the World Cup. I could see him having an even better season next year, which seems weird because he's one of those players that when Leeds were coming up, I was like, they might have to ditch him if they want to do well, but he's been the cornerstone of their success.
Yeah, definitely. I know what you mean. It's interesting because they're just kind of different seasons, aren't they? We were kind of talking about, like, would he be able to replicate his breakout season again? But obviously he's 27, but you kind of have to almost see him in the same way as, like, a younger player having a breakout season. It's a lot harder to replicate the form of a breakout season than it is to replicate or to play well off the back of that. So yeah, I would agree with what you said, and I think he probably will go from strength to strength.
Finally,
watch him score like 5 goals next season.
That's the thing with Leeds. It's like, will Leeds continue to build, or will people like have figured out Leeds in much the same way that sort of like Wolves had a season this year, or Sheffield United, but obviously not that poorly. And will Leeds sort of struggle a lot more next season? But looking at
time will tell.
Looking at our final team for this episode, because we are running on a bit, and a good place to cut it halfway is 10th place. And this is another team that we had the same position for. 10th place Everton, we both thought they would finish 7th. Rupert, you want to walk through why you thought they would finish there and why you think they failed to live up to that prediction?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think of this as maybe like a consistent flaw in my predictions, which was to get, drawn in by the romance of the starting 11 in the same way that I thought Liverpool would finish top. I kind of thought that Everton had strengthened so much in key areas for their starting 11 that they were going to compete really well against the big sides, and barring a lot of injuries, I thought that they would have, a pretty solid, consistent season. And they did get hit with quite a few injuries, so, it's hard to predict that, but at the same time, you can definitely see it coming like you did with Liverpool by looking at the squad that they have behind them. I just feel like they hit the ground running and then they got knocked back a couple of steps and never quite managed to get going again.
Yeah, it was a very weird sort of. They've won their first 4 games, and everyone was going, great, well, they're flying. Is this a different Everton? Are they going to be sort of a dark horse this year? And then their 5th game they played against Liverpool, and that was sort of their, is this going to be where they're brought back to earth? And it was a 2-2 draw, so it's not like they did themselves poorly. And then sort of this season for me, Everton, they were kind of like the poster boys for ridiculous points to drop. Like, by the time we got to the end of the season, it felt like every other week I was sort of looking at the scores or I was watching the games and I was going, how have Everton conspired to lose that one? They lost games at home to Burnley, they lost at home to Fulham, in fact, they were the only team this season, this isn't exactly a surprising fact because not a lot of teams did lose at home to these teams, they were the only team to lose at home to both Fulham and Sheffield United. And I just looked at that, and obviously there are injuries, but I was just like, how have you managed this? It just feels like they took their foot off the pedal one too many times. And again, they're another team that when the season is a bit more regular, I think they could really improve. But the first thing they need to improve is just making sure that they have that, that ability to get the wins where you can. I know it sounds like a weird thing to say in the Premier League where anyone can beat you, but over the course of it, you shouldn't be getting beaten by all those teams at home, and they just love to drop those points.
Yeah, true. They did, and they never really managed to maintain any sort of form. It's interesting. I quite like the idea that it's like the thing on your CV that you like Carlo Ancelotti just leaves off. Just kind of like pretends it didn't happen. It's like, no, I was on sabbatical that year, wasn't I? As he goes back to Real Madrid
and leaves James Rodriguez there crying, and he's like, "Please take me with you."
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, they definitely flattered to deceive, I think is the way I would describe their season. But James Rodriguez might not play another incredible game for them in the same way that he did under his mentor Carlo. But it feels like DCL's there to stay. It feels like Ben Godfrey's really exciting. They've still got pretty exciting, like vibrant midfield. Richarlison's still very good. Like I don't think I think it's more like a blip season rather than they're going to go down a lot in performance or they're going to get a lot better. I kind of just feel like they might just continue to steadily build on that. And again, I wouldn't be surprised if they finish, 7th, 8th, 9th next season and just keep kind of nudging their way up the table.
Yeah, I think if they get if they get the next manager right, obviously it's the most important thing right now, you could see them going places. Because, Calvert-Lewin's fantastic. I remember looking at that midfield at the start of the season of Allen, Doucouré and Andre Gomez. And it was one of those midfields that I was kind of like, ooh, when you look at a midfield and you're like, ooh, everyone sort of like fills each other's role and they have like really good synergy. That's really nice to look at. And that was one of those midfields. And then unfortunately it was just a situation where they were all sort of injured here and there. And a lot of the time Allen was coming back and he couldn't quite get to full match fitness. And similarly, Andre Gomez missed a lot of games. And so you never really got to see that. So it's kind of like, on the one hand, they've lost Ancelotti, who, if he'd had time to work with that squad when they were fully fit, could have maybe done really good things. But on the other hand, next season they will have a squad that is, hopefully, more fit for more of it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, who do you see as being a good manager to replace Ancelotti?
Of the people who are available or of just anyone?
Just anyone. I mean, firstly, I guess, like, if there's anyone that is available and you think would be good, then obviously say them first. But just, who do you think would be a solid acquisition?
I think so. It's kind of I think he's about to go to Crystal Palace, so I don't know if he's still available. But I think Nuno would be a really good signing for Everton, largely because I think, as I was talking about, sort of Everton's big weakness was just dropping stupid points. And Nuno at his peak in the Premier League, remember that Wolves side of last season, and they just never dropped a point that they didn't need to. And even when they did, God, would they make you fight for it? Yeah,
true. They were a real threat last season, and I think we both put them at like 6th or something like that for this one. So obviously we'll talk about that, but I could see that. I think I guess similar profiles in that they have a pretty solid defensive squad and a couple of exciting players up top to maybe make up the goal scoring tallies. Weirdly, I don't know what you think about this, but for some reason, and I don't think there's any indication that he's going to leave, but I just feel like Ralph Hasenhüttl fits the profile of the club really well. Not least for which because like he's also prone to like a weird loss or like a massive loss in the same way that Everton lost
each other out
to both Sheffield and Fulham. But I don't know. I just feel like I would rather see like a more dynamic Klopp mould of a manager than someone like Nuno who's going to like really grind out and hit on the counter. I feel like Everton have enough about them that they can be like a straight attacking minded team. I don't know. What do you make of that?
I agree, and I do think that would be a sort of more natural follow-on from Ancelotti. I do also sometimes think that sometimes teams that are really good are sort of a manager standing on the shoulders of his predecessor, if you know what I mean by that. Like a very basic example of that isn't exactly this, but I think like when you look at Chelsea this season and you look at how Tuchel has come in and he's worked really hard on the defence and he's made Chelsea do really well, he hasn't really had to worry about someone like Mason Mount because it was Frank Lampard who brought him into the 11. Now, Frank Lampard was not the right manager for Chelsea. I think we can agree with that now and sort of look back and go, well, but there are sort of stepping stones that Frank Lampard put in place that Tuchel was then able to use to sort of achieve greatness. And I look in the same way at Everton and I go, Nuno's strength isn't necessarily sort of going for all these fruity attacking midfielders like Richarlison and James Rodriguez playing sort of dynamic football with a pacey front man. He's all about shoring up the defence. If that first bit is already done at Everton, could he sort of do the last few puzzle pieces and actually create a really good team? And that's why I sort of feel it might be a good fit.
Yeah, very fair. I mean, I could definitely see it. I mean, I also kind of agree that, often you get a really exciting team when, an attacking-minded manager who's works on the attack is replaced by a more defensive-minded manager who kind of shores up the defence, and then suddenly they look like a really coherent unit for at least a year, and produce some great results. Even if, that then maybe drops off because, for example, like the attack is, not as worked on, so they kind of remember how to attack for a season and then slowly forget again because they don't put as much effort in the training ground for it. But yeah, I could see someone like Nuno coming in and shoring up the defence, and then suddenly they're just an absolute threat, a balanced threat.
Yeah, definitely could. That about does it for us this week. Rupert, great to talk to you as always.
Cam, thank you very much, and well done for your accurate predictions. I'm wearing my dunce's hat for my West Ham call. And we'll see you next time for the rest of the table. Thanks for listening.
Cheers, guys. Bye.